Hi, I'm Desiree Butler, owner and operator of Pillow Talk of Birth, pregnancy and labor specialist, and I'm coming to you today to be a special speaker, and I'm going to be talking to you about the language surrounding VBAC. We talk about VBAC is vaginal birth after C-section or cesarean, and in the United States, we have a high C-section rate, and our VBAC rate, which is a vaginal birth after C-section rate, I believe in 2017 and 18. 2018 it was 13.3%. 2017 it was 12.8%. That is really low for that to be the VBAC rate, compared to the amount of VBAC success, which means the people that have had a vaginal birth after cesarean, the rate of success for that is actually really high. So let's just get into that. Let's just get into talking about the language surrounding birth and childbirth. The biggest things that I noticed the language surrounding birth is the lack of true informed consent. And what that means is knowing all of your options before making a decision in your birth. So when we talk about the language surrounding a VBAC, we have to talk about the language leading up to the VBAC. There is oftentimes stipulations with language when it comes to leading up to your vaginal birth after C-section, such as going through a process of wanting to use the VBAC calculator, which 2020, as of 2020, we had received from ACOG, obstetric and community of obstetric and gynecology, which is the board that governs all of the medical birth providers. They came back and said that the VBAC calculator has not been accurate and are willing to revisit the idea of looking at the VBAC calculator just to confirm and kind of talk more about what's going on with that and how it's not a reflection of the statistics that's showing for the success rate for VBAC. So, what makes families want to VBAC? Why have we come to this VBAC place in the medical community and in the birth community? So we can say that C-sections have been on the rise, and that over 90% of births do not require or is not necessary for a C-section, as the death rates are increasing with that type of intervention. So when we think of VBAC, we often need to think of why do we want to do vaginal birth after C-section? And the number one thing I can think of is because that is the natural process. So I often hear doctors asking families that want VBACs. It's like a trial of questions when we ask that, when we talk about VBACs. Another thing that I notice about the language with VBACs is that doctors oftentimes will ask you why. You know, like I just went through, like, why do you want a VBAC? And it's like, why are we asking someone why they want to do a particular process on their body? Why are we not saying, okay, this is what you want, let's plan and execute and figure out a way to get you what you want and on your journey, on your childbirth journey. And I definitely think that that is the language. We set it up as, when we're speaking about childbirth and we're speaking about approval per se, it's set up as we must get approval from our medical providers in order for the birth to go, or the process of the birth to be respected. So let's visit that. Like a lot of times when we go to the hospitals and we speak with the doctor, we will say, "Hey, I want to know if I can. I want to know if this is possible. If I can do this. I want to know if I'm allowed. I want to know, do you accept that?" So when we're talking about our birth and with the language surrounding birth and VBAC, it's oftentimes the birthing person is giving permission over to the medical provider. Because I've seen home births that are VBAC, and from across the board of VBACs, even from home birth without medical providers, to home birth with a medical provider, such as a midwife, to a hospital VBAC with a doctor or any type of medical provider that may work in the hospital setting that are attending VBACs. I've seen it across the board, and I would say the language leading up to families in the hospital setting is a lot more controlling, is a lot more permission based, is a lot more non-evident based, but more so the medical facilities comfortability with it, not respecting the person and what they want for their birth, is more so what makes sense to the medical facility. So when we talk about VBAC, vaginal birth after C-section, we have to be ready to hear those words because they have been a part of this medical journey for a long time. Allowing the medical provider to decide what goes on in births is what happens 95% of the times in hospitals. But when you're at home, your medical provider, such as your midwife, is then walking into your domain of comfortability. And so when we think about walking out of our house, and which we know where everything is, what everything is in what place, to walking into a facility where you're then the foreign person in there, you're then the guest. So that language is going to change for yourself as well, because then you're no longer, when you're in your home and doing what you want to do, even if your medical provider is being forceful with his or her language, with their language, you're still more comfortable with speaking what you want because of the surrounding setting is a comforting setting. It energizes you and giving you comfort, because then I'm in my own home, so my comfort in my home is going to be different than the comfort in a hospital. And we don't even, in the United States, I can only speak for the medical facilities here in Georgia, you cannot VBAC at a birth center. You had to meet certain stipulations to VBAC at a birth center. Your options are VBACing at a hospital or doing home birth. And a lot of times midwives don't cover VBACs at home because of insurance liability. So the language surrounding it makes it seem like it's so dangerous. When we say medical providers don't come to the house to cover home births because of insurance liability, to me it sounds like the medical provider didn't come because it's a higher risk. So when we talk about language, we need to be aware that that is a part of the language, the framing of it, when we frame it in certain manners such as that. So I was just thinking about that, like it requires so much energy to wade through the language, and to get to the core of the reasons behind why we talk in such a coercive way surrounding VBACs and surrounding birth. And that comes down to, again, tradition. This is just how birth has been done for a long time. Families have been given over the power because there's power in their words, giving over the power of making the decisions in their birth to medical providers. So they're used to this being the route that is taken for most families. They're used to most families not being educated. And that's why I said it comes down to true informed consent. Because if you're not educated on the process of birth, you're not educated on the process of choices, if we're not told statistics that the success rate for having a vaginal birth after C-section is really high, especially if we reduce the risk of interventions, if we reduce the risk of stress and fear, it would change again, because the language surrounding it is just as important as the process that's chosen and the success in the process of your childbirth journey, as well as your birth journey. So we have to be mindful of that language and be mindful of when we hire our birth team, even our non-medical birth team, such as a doula as myself. And we have to be very mindful that language such as allow, let, all of that belongs to the birthing person and the birthing person alone. I always give the example of the circle, and the birthing person is in the middle of that circle, and everybody that the birthing person hires, including the partner, also sits on the outside. We're all there to be advisors and to be supportive of the birthing person's wishes, and providing our due diligence and our background to make sure that we're giving our client what they're asking for, and not just following a regimen of using certain words during our birth journey to make it uncomfortable, to place that fear of doubt. All you need is an ounce of doubt in yourself and in the process for the power of fear to make it easy to control the process and the decisions. And it feels so out of hand because you feel like I, as a non-medical person, being a birthing person, I can't make these decisions anymore, because through this journey I have been told that I need to be mindful of my decisions because I am placing myself at a greater risk by making decisions. So it's like a double-edged sword. And so that's why I'm very picky about language, because we must make sure that during the birthing journey, even with going to the appointment and the constantly, asking, oh, you want to do a VBAC? Oh, that's dangerous. Why? And this is coming from medical providers. It's coming from nurses, doctors, OBGYNs. Hearing that type of language, hearing the distrust in families' ability to birth creates a mistrust in the ability to birth. So it changes the viewpoint of, I want to have my baby the way I want to have my baby, to now this is some type of emergency or medical event that needs intervention, that needs medical attention to make these decisions, because we've been using words like, oh, well, we'll let you do this, but. So when we put phrases and things in there, it just really changes the way we view it. So I have done some research, and I'm excited to talk about some of the languages and phrases that I've heard surrounding VBAC. And we're definitely going to go through, it's a lot of them, so we're definitely going to go through them and really talk about each one of them and talk about the language surrounding it, as well as how we feel about the language surrounding and what it means to us. So I'm going to pull up a few. I'm going to have them up there on the screen, and we're just going to discuss them. So the first one we're going to talk about is some of the languages and phrases that I've heard. One of the things that I have heard surrounding VBAC is that you can't have a VBAC if your BMI is too high. And we talk about vaginal birth and VBAC and BMI. They tend to group with VBAC. Oftentimes we hear your weight will affect your body's ability to birth. So when people say their BMI is too high, I often ask my client who has often been discouraged after hearing a comment like, oh, your BMI is too high, so you can't VBAC. I ask them questions that you can always ask yourself is, have I been having a tough pregnancy? Has my weight during my pregnancy journey affected my health of myself and the baby? And what is the evidence behind not allowing someone to VBAC because they don't meet a spectrum of a list that isn't been tailored for each individual pregnant person? It hasn't been tailored for each individual journey and individual experiences that come along with it. So when I hear disappointing phrases thrown up, such as, we can't let you VBAC, and I'm going to continue to use these quotation marks because we must remember that doctors and medical providers are your advisors. So I often call them your advisors because they're supposed to provide you with support and evidence behind their recommendation. So when I hear a medical provider say, we don't do VBACs because your BMI is too high, you have to ask them for evidence behind it. What is the evidence behind that? That not being allowed to VBAC because of your BMI. Another thing that I've often heard is, you can't VBAC because you're too far along, meaning that you're 39 weeks. The forced induction of a VBAC is they put serious stipulations on Vbacs when there is none. So let's review that. When doctors say, oh, you can't VBAC because you're past, you've been pregnant for too long, or you're too far along at 39 weeks, the average gestation of a baby is 42 weeks. And that's normally bare minimum. But we here in the United States are putting a time frame, an unrealistic time frame on Vbacs. So when we ask like 39 weeks and they're like, oh, the baby isn't coming at 39 weeks, I'm too far along to have a vaginal birth after C-section. And I have to ask my clients to stop and think about that. How can you be too far along when your body is doing exactly what it needs to do and your baby is going to send the signal from their lungs to start labor when time is right? If not, if you have any health issues, of course, go in. But the discouraging thing is being told that you can't VBAC because you're too far along. Again, it creates that doubt because it's creating that I can't. It's creating that I am putting myself in danger by choosing to VBAC, and I'm 40 weeks. So it's an unrealistic number and stress that we often hear put on families from the medical community about VBAC. Another one, I had a client was told that she couldn't VBAC because she was too short. Actually taking in the height of the person and regarding that and using that as a basis to calculate VBAC. I don't even really know how to even begin to even depict or break that one down. We're just going to leave that one there and say, if medical providers, one, are giving you these comments or this protocol and plan and giving you these, I would encourage you to review who your medical provider is. Because during your birth, the one thing that we know is really powerful is the mood and the words and the power in that birthing and labor event. And when you have somebody that does not feel that you can do what you know you were designed and wanting to do in your birth, it truly changes your ability and your power in that setting to do what you set out to do. And Another one up here. So here's a good one. You can't read VBAC because you've already had 3 C-sections and it's too risky. So this is a really, really, really good one. So this one I always have to ask myself. A medical provider thinks it's safer to recut open a scar that has already been cut 3 times. Your uterus has been cut 3 times. So you think the safer route, when we know part of the medical process is first do no harm, when we know the safest route that you would choose is to cut somebody open because it's too risky to not cut them open. So we have to be, again, being mindful of the language and really breaking it down and really looking at it and really saying, wait, does this language work for me? Is this something that I see for myself? Does this match my journey? Does this advice advisable for me in my birth, in this particular birth? I've heard also your pelvis is too small. So when we talk about childbirth education, in one of the basic classes, we explain that the pelvis moves. It shifts during childbirth and during pregnancy. Your hormones called relaxin, actually goes through and it loosens up your hips and your ligaments. And so that's why a lot of pregnant people feel very unstable when they talk about birth, because your hips are loose and you are really relaxed and you're able to get into those cool positions that I've seen. The flexibility is amazing. But yes, so when we hear about the pelvis being too small, the better question to ask the doctor is, how will we be able to say the pelvis is too small if I have not birthed yet? Because you cannot use previous pregnancies to diagnose, which is pathology, a current pregnancy. So that won't work. You can't have a VBAC unless you go into labor by 39 weeks, before 39 weeks. We talked about the time frame as previously I said. So we hear oftentimes like, oh, if we don't start labor at 36, 37 weeks, we can't let you go. We can't let you go. We can't let you go. And I keep saying we can't because we get so used to hearing those words again. We can't, I can't, we won't allow you. It's not recommended. And when we hear that, we don't think, wait a minute, why is it not recommended? Why have I been put on this unrealistic time frame if we know that everybody's baby and body development is different? Why is this time frame suitable now? If you have a VBAC, your baby will have brain damage and your uterus will rupture. We hear this often. And let's break this down. When we talk about the uterus rupturing, even with, I believe, more than one C-section, your uterus still is at a 98% less likely to rupture. So let's repeat that. You're at a 98% chance of your uterus not rupturing for a VBAC, a vaginal birth after C-section. You're at a 98% of your uterus not rupturing if you have a vaginal birth after C-section. And I've had these, and these are so common that I, had a lot of people reach out to me because I wanted to make sure that the language that I heard surrounding VBAC had been current, meaning that I'm getting these from 2020 families and birth professionals who have experienced these words in 2020. And then if you VBAC, your baby will die when your uterus ruptures. That is unacceptable. This language in VBAC birth is truly, truly unacceptable. I keep encouraging families that when you have a provider that are using words as if you have a VBAC, your baby will die when your uterus ruptures, that is not a provider that should be speaking with families. It's such an important time during your birth journey, especially a VBAC, to build trust. And trust comes from you trusting your provider to not use coercive language to change your path or direct your path in any way, but to advise you of what all your options are so that you can make a healthy, informed decision. You can't VBAC because your body doesn't know how to go into labor. It never learned how to, so now it can't. So what about first-time moms? That's the question I would ask. So we asked that, when we asked that question to our medical provider, it's like, what about first-time moms? So you're telling someone who had a C-section that their body doesn't know how, as you're telling them that they're broken? Unacceptable. That language should never be used because that's unacceptable. You can't VBAC because you don't have a proven pelvis. I don't even know what that means. What does your pelvis have to prove to anybody? Why are people trying to prove their pelvis? I don't even know what that means. You can't VBAC because your baby is too big. How is a baby too big? How do we come to the conclusion that the baby is too big? We don't have any health issues. When you review most of the clients and patients, they don't have any health issues, but they're assuming that the baby is too big. Oh, one of the great things that I hear often is it's not called a VBAC because you didn't VBAC at all. It's called a TOLAC, a trial of labor after C-section. I truly hate that because no one's on trial. You don't have to prove anything. You are allowed to choose at any moment of time when you want to switch it up. So if you're doing a VBAC and you decide that you no longer want to take that route, you were never on trial to perform. It is not a performance. It is a journey. And in that journey, the freedom of choice is always there. There is no trial. And then I hear failed vaginal C-section after C-section. So that is unacceptable. Putting failed in front of any type of service surrounding birth is unacceptable. No one failed at anything. Again, that language is very coercive and abusive. Saying that someone failed is unacceptable. You have a short cervix. Your risk is too high. And then you say, what risk? And they can't really tell you. Oh, your cervix is short. Well, if your cervix is short, doesn't that mean that's actually even better because the baby would be quicker to come down and come out? So having twins, they automatically try to rule out having twins, saying that the risk for having twins, your uterus rupture, will be higher. That's absolutely not true. You had pre-E last time, bringing up your last pregnancy history. We do not put and jumble up each pregnancies. They are separated from the body because they are natural events that the body goes through individually each time for each child. So when we speak about last time, you had pre-E last time, your baby was breached last time. You know, you were slower at growth. Your growth of your baby slowed down last time. When we speak about last pregnancies, that is a huge no-no because you cannot bring in last pregnancies, situations, and experience into a brand new journey and experience. You're too tall for a VBAC. Again, height. I've heard that, used plenty of times. We don't have a OR readily available to facilitate a VBAC. You do not have to give birth vaginally inside of an operating room. When we talk about VBAC, that does not increase your risk of having to birth in an operating room. But what does increase your risk is going into an operating room and trying to focus and feel comfortable when you're surrounded by blue gloves everywhere, when you're being told that this is super dangerous. You're being put in an OR to birth your baby comfortably, but there's no comfort in a sterile facility that is designed for operating. So it creates this false sense of increased danger that can be really dangerous in a birth, that increased sense of danger. You can't have a C-section because last time you had to have an emergency C-section because your water broke. So there has been previous reasons that C-sections given before were not evidence-based. And a lot of the C-sections that are given are not evidence-based. And it's been used plenty of times by saying, oh, you cannot give birth because you've had a C-section before. So it's a lot of non-emergency based situations have been used as a catalyst for a C-section. Like clients saying her water had broke, so they decided to do a C-section. It's concerning. You can't have a vaginal birth after a C-section because you're black. Racism is a blatant part of birth in the hospitals, and trust in especially black birthing bodies, black and brown birthing bodies have been taken advantage of for far too long. So birthing while black is a huge issue in the hospital. VBAC is less likely to be achievable in a hospital by a black or brown person because of the stereotypes that is still passed around the medical community surrounding black and brown bodies. I've also, like I said, Vbacs as such is concerning medical malpractice and insurance. This, again, is concerning. Why are we bringing into insurance into a true informed consent situation? If the medical provider is first to do no harm and provide support, why are we not just providing the unapologetic support to families? Why are we using our insurance to cut into healthy people under the disguise of liability? You can have a VBAC because I just don't want you to be disappointed. Medical providers have said it's not their job to predict how you're going to feel about your VBAC. It's not their job to predict how the VBAC journey will go. It's their job to support you. And using words like that, again, creates that false sense of hope and fear in there. You can't VBAC because even though your last VBAC was 12 years ago or whatever X amount of years ago, you've had two, so it's still super risky. So it's just a lot of it. Wow. So another, family had commented, our surgeons aren't here between whatever time and whatever time. So if something was to happen at the time, we will have to delay getting help for you. That's unacceptable. We should never accept words like that or even phrases like that. If I'm going into a hospital, I do not believe that my services should be delayed in the event of an emergency and that surgeons only can work on certain hours because I've chosen a different birth journey that doesn't reflect the medical personnel's personal decisions on their own life. We need to place an epidural in case of an emergency because your BMI is so high. We need to place an epidural for any reason. An epidural actually increases your chance of you not having a VBAC because it actually puts more pressure on your uterus. It puts more pressure on your body because you can't feel anything. So it delays everything, and it delays the development of the progression of labor and birth. So using an epidural as a reason for a VBAC to occur can be really dangerous, and it's dangerous wording, especially for families that decided that they didn't want to take the synthetic drug route. They wanted to do a medication-free route. That should be an option. And having that as a forced set frame, again, is very coercive and very disheartening because then it creates a set of fear. You cannot be back because your scar is too thick or too thin. The baby cannot drop and labor won't start. So all of these are assumptions. We've heard this before. You cannot be back with this. You cannot. None of these reasons that I have stated are listed as an actual reason to not be able to VBAC. It's a reason for you to replace one of your birth team members. It's your responsibility if something happens to your baby. Isn't it always your responsibility? As that always is going to be your baby. You're always going to have that baby. You're always going to make decisions for your baby. And using your baby as a reason to not allow someone to VBAC is disturbing, because you're saying the responsibility of what's already your responsibility. You already have a tough decision to make. Your responsibility is on you. You're trusting your medical providers to be able to step in when you say and that you need help. How can you trust somebody if they're taking the responsibility and flipping it and gaslighting it onto you when it already always was your responsibility? And then when we hear like there's a 25% risk of rupture after 3 C-sections. And the correct response should be, which is true, because they go, oh, it's an increased risk if you have a C-section. It's an increased risk if you do that. Well, let's discuss that. The truth is, when you look at the evidence and the research that shows that the statistics and the studies are too small to even give that rate or satirical number into rupturing after a vaginal birth. So it's very much so inaccurate, because that's a made-up number. Just to keep it short and sweet, that's a made-up number, because we have more successful VBACs than we do have the fail rate when the pregnant person has a supportive team. Those are a lot of the things. You can't VBAC because you are retaining too much water. You have polyandrominals, which is too much water. And then when you naturally go into labor, oh, we don't recommend that you VBAC because you still have too much water. And they go, well, I'm going to labor, my water's breaking right now. So what does that mean? Oh no, it's still too dangerous because the amount of water is too high. So all of this language that we have just discussed, all of those are oftentimes scare tactics and inaccurate. The language surrounding your birth, vaginal birth, has to be very particular, because that changes your mind frame in that process. It also changes the faith that you have in your body and your baby's ability to do what it needs to do. It creates so much more doubt and fear into your journey that can be truly detrimental to your journey and the outcome. And we talk about PTSD and just, a lot of trauma surrounding birth. And that all comes down to, did you feel like the language surrounding your birth, did you feel it was respectful, empowering? Did it make you feel like this is something that I'm doing right and I have all of the support that I need in order for me to be successful? So, this is Desiree Butler from Pillow Talk of Birth. I have enjoyed talking with you about the language surrounding VBAC. I have a birth page and I have a birth shop that offers a lot of great goodies and services.